Like most Zoomers, Nolan's Batman was my Batman, and upon revisiting these films in a post-Reeve and Snyder world, what stood out to me was how it synchronized both the biographical journey of a man and the story of a symbol. Each installment opens with the bat symbol. In The Dark Knight, it's a shadow consuming the flames, establishing itself as a story about an incorruptible symbol. In Rises, the bat is created by the cracks in the ice. The Batman can only exist with the needs of his world. In Begins, the symbol is a feral force created by nature, an idea which has chosen Bruce as its host. The prologue is him as a boy, hiding and falling down a well, where he swarms, a moment that haunts him even as an adult, before he fights a bold dude. But in the darkness, someone darker walks out with wisdom about how it's more effective to fight crime by serving a symbol.
And if they can't stop you,
because it transcends mortality, and in this moment, everything is in harmony. We know as the audience he's really foreshadowing Batman, so our anticipation is orientated by this theatrical angle where, unlike previously, he's not a larger-than-life romantic Byronic prince living in a castle far away from our perspective characters, or a campy man doing things in the campy world. We now see him intimately, as a journey of someone making meaning from trauma.
do you still feel responsible for your parents' death?
My anger outweighs my guilt.
And as a story about Batman as a political and social project. As a result, the whole film's storytelling is a double entendre, where the dual development of the man and the symbol piggybacks off each other, providing mutual purpose and meaning, and the destination of both stories are the same. It's Batman. However, it's also the film after Batman and Robin, so some of the residual goofiness carries over when it comes to its theatrics. There are just straight up ninjas, like pajama-looking ones. Alfred sees his surrogate son alive after almost a decade, and instead of being in tears, he just starts cracking jokes.
You look very fashionable.
Old Jimbo drives the Batmobile at the end, and he's bumbling around like a cartoon character. There are so many one-liners that are just out-of-character catchphrases, like,
I gotta get me one of those.
Anyways, Batman Begins is a transitionary piece, carefully designed to train the audience to a new storytelling language where, unlike before, the whys do matter, big personalities aren't self-justified, and the big theatrics are all motivated by the personal. It's about creating a new equilibrium which everything can be balanced on.
Something changing your mind.
The sequels then tweak this equilibrium in different ways. The Dark Knight puts the symbol before the biographical. Rachel dies and Bruce gets over it overnight. Joker's reveal is famously him replying to what he believes in which his face is the answer.
Stranger.
There is a glimpse of a man underneath, a sad man, but hidden, because it doesn't matter. Similarly, Batman's introduction is through the discourse around him. He's now a well-oiled machine, operating on a whole other level than everyone else. While Bruce still acts like a young man in his attitude and sensitivity, his relationship with Alfred paints him like a teenager who's still wishy-washy, still sheltered, still not emotionally matured.
To try to impress Miss Dawes.
Very droll.
A dimension which Rises paints as something he needs to grow out of, but right here, right now, that youthful and light presence is what makes him theatrical.
Any psychotic ex-boyfriends I should be aware of?
Oh, you have no idea.
Both Batman and Joker are these forces of nature who exist in a reality separate from everyone else, and it's glorious. What makes The Dark Knight mind-blowing is how it perfectly balances itself as a modern deconstruction and as a fun, sincere reconstruction of Batman's cliches. Heath Ledger is scary and gives gravitas to the Joker, but at the same time his antics would be the same if Cesar Romero played him.
The Joker planned to be caught.
He kidnaps the girl and gives Batman a time limit, but he also poses uncomfortable modern political questions Batman wasn't originally designed to answer, like what does this popularity mean for society's faith in law and order?
The prosecution's over. Nobody's standing up in front of a judge while judges and police commissioners are getting blown away.
Harvey's coin, where both sides have heads, represents both the belief that justice is the natural state of the world and is an act of arrogance over how much control all the characters believe they have in their plans. Therefore, to scar just even one side of the coin is to take away this faith and surrender to the notion that true fairness can only exist in chaos, because order is a lie.
Oh, and you know the thing about chaos? It's fair.
The only morality in a cruel world his chance.
Harvey's downfall is a microcosm of this, and thus he becomes symbolically dangerous for Gotham's future.
People will lose hope. They won't.
Bruce's arc is about growing out of this naivety so he can become more than what he was emotionally capable of, and that's where the reconstruction side comes in. The key to making it all work is that instead of taking Batman out of his own terms, it allows the answers to grow on his.
You truly are incorruptible, aren't you?
Batman is so heroic, so beyond what's demanded of him, that he can self-destruct his own reputation to protect people's faith.
You're not.
I'm whatever Gotham needs me to be.
The Dark Knight adjusted the equilibrium between man and the symbol from Begins, so the study of the symbols is now amplified, and it's through that amplification that it can theatrically facilitate the joys of Batman and Joker in their glory,
I think you and I are destined to do this forever.
while still asking deeper questions. This is something which almost all the dark and gritty reboots that followed failed to understand. It wasn't the darker aesthetic or deviations that was intriguing, it was about singing familiar notes with more purpose, more depth, and more credibility. That was the hook. Dark Knight Rises is the opposite in terms of leaning more towards the biographical than the symbolic. There are references to symbols. It opens with Gordon still believing in the idea of Harvey Dent, and this idea of faith in old symbols is a recurring theme.
But I'm still a believer in the Batman. Even if you're not.
But it's not a very active part of the story. Ra's believed balance required killing.
Like your father, you lack the courage to do all that is necessary.
Batman believed in redemption and goodness in people. Joker argued that the natural state of people is anarchy and selfishness, while Batman proved him wrong. Bane doesn't really have a philosophical proposition outside of "take back your city, Gotham," but secretly he's gonna blow up everyone anyways. The anarchy Joker argued becomes real, but there's no subplot with ordinary people like in the Dark Knight, which gave you a tangible example of Gotham's soul in conflict. Bane himself isn't a true anarchist or even a real revolutionary. He's doing this out of love for Talia, who's doing this for her father. But Ra's didn't do this out of personal hatred of Gotham, it was just a next cesspool in his list.
The League of Shadows has been a check against human corruption for thousands of years.
Therefore, Talia isn't a real philosophical extension of him, especially now that Gotham isn't a cesspool at all anymore.
When you and Dad cleaned up the streets, you cleaned them good. Pretty soon we'll be chasing down overdue library books.
She's either misunderstood her father or is just totally blinded by emotions, which is fine I guess, because revenge isn't usually rational, and the line,
Could not forgive my father until you murdered him.
I found oddly touching, but it also highlights the deprioritization of symbols and the favoring of the personal and the biographical, thus upsetting the way they both fed and amplified each other. The terms of the story now exist entirely under the rules of capital letter poetry, where sentimentality is what drives themes and development, as opposed to big questions or debates. Batman retires after his reputation is destroyed. His heart is broken.
There's nothing out there for me.
And that's the problem.
So he has to come back for one last battle. That's an awesome premise, but is a weird follow-up and an even stranger interpretation of Bruce Wayne. The notion of a perfectly healthy Batman quitting is a real, what? The whole film is built around anticipation. It has two distinct halves. The first is about ghosts and stuffy rich people business. A lot of artistic liberties are taken with the direction of the characters, not just in terms of the overall Batman canon, but also relative to what came before. Alfred went from being a supporter and proud of Batman to being extremely against it.
I never wanted you to come back to Gotham.
Then why did you keep Bruce's finances in order?
Well, it's a good thing I left everything to you then. Quite so, sir.
The second half is a city under siege, where Bruce finally learns to live again, so he can finally grow old and move beyond his pain. While in the background, we watch a rookie cop with the same courage, value of life, and intuition as a young Bruce lose his faith in the system, and eventually become the next Batman. He's a character written with a level of anonymity because he's supposed to represent us, the audience.
The idea was to be a symbol. Batman could be anybody. That was the point.
Dark Knight Rises is not about singing an old tune with more purpose, but making up your own song with more instruments, but also less purpose to an extent. Ambivalence is how I describe my feelings. The poetry is beautiful, character motivations is well acted, the filmmaking has not only gotten better in the last 10 years, but it's also less careful with everything. It's now all character drama without being bolstered by the study of symbols beneath it. Therefore it's not as dense in the same way. It's bigger, but not as detailed in its ideas and patterns. The overall proportioning between the two stories is now upset. But despite all of this, there is an animalistic part of my brain that couldn't help but to be appreciative of this ending, the kindness of it. The immortality of the symbol doesn't mean the destruction of the flesh. They can just separate when the impact is made.
Your resources, your knowledge. It doesn't need your body or your life.
If the old Batman films were a stylistic arms race where it couldn't stop pushing itself from more goth to more camp because there weren't any broader story arcs or characters to escalate in terms of development, the Dark Knight trilogy is the reverse. The tone and style is consistent despite their differences. Begins as an unembarrassed superhero movie with ninjas and Batman swinging on a train, Night as a hardcore crime drama, and rises as traditional Hollywood spectacle, but the central biographical tale of a man getting over his past and a primal force of nature manifesting itself through this man into becoming a legend, just as Descartes promised. That was consistent all the way through, despite the odd proportioning in the storytelling. These films are experiments that yielded some very glorious results, but more importantly, insight. To create more than just a man, you have to see your story as a study between the man and the symbol.
Perhaps both Bruce and Mr. Dent believe that Batman stands for something more important than the whims of a terrorist, Miss Dawes. Even if everyone hates him for it, that's the sacrifice he's making. He's not being a hero. He's being something more.
Staring at the wall, I know you really love the color. We picked it out over the phone. Remember what you said, but I could never tell the meaning. I try to see what I have been shown. Staring at the pictures now, I know they try to show me. I cannot see, but God knows I try. Believer of the mysteries, I try to find a way not to cry.
So this was the Dark Knight trilogy video. Originally this was supposed to be just The Dark Knight Rises, but then as I was writing it, I really needed Begins and The Dark Knight to bolster my points, so then I added 2 paragraphs at the beginning of it. But then those 2 eventually got so big, I realized, okay, I'm just gonna equally proportion it then. All 3 films have their own distinct sections, and hopefully this video was interesting. I don't know.
I suppose it wouldn't do any harm